imagine the silence of the seafloor, not the usual silence, but that special, ancient silence that holds the echoes of millennia, where the sunlight barely breaks through the water column, turning into shimmering emerald rays, where time flows differently, slower, as if frozen in amber. There are stones, ordinary, seemingly ordinary stones. But if you listen, if you stand still and surrender to this underwater silence, you can almost hear them whispering about the city that once stood here above the waves, shining in the hot Indian sun. The city that was called the Golden City. Greetings, my dear listeners. Tonight, we're going to take a journey to the place where legend and reality meet, where ancient lore intertwines with modern archaeology so closely that sometimes it's impossible to know where myth ends and history begins. Let me know in the comments what city you're from and what time it is where you are as we dive into this amazing story together. You know, there is something fascinating about the idea of a sunken city. Maybe it's our ancient, almost primitive admiration for the power of the elements, for the way the ocean can swallow whole civilizations, turning them into a memory, into the whisper of the waves. Or maybe we are attracted by the very idea that under the water, in the cold blue of the sea depths, another world continues to exist, a world frozen in the moment of its death, keeping the secrets of bygone eras. And today, we will talk about one such place, about the city which in ancient texts was called Dvaraka. Imagine the west coast of India, the edge of the earth, the westernmost tip of the Saurashtra Peninsula, where the state of Gujarat meets the infinity of the Arabian Sea. Here, where the reddish earth suddenly breaks away, giving way to the surf, stands the modern city of Dwarka, small, provincial, but filled with a special atmosphere of holiness. Pilgrims come here from all over India, treading barefoot on the sun-heated stones of ancient streets. They come to worship the temples, dip in the sacred waters, and touch something eternal. Because Dvarka is not just a city. It is one of the 4 dhammas, the sacred pilgrimage sites of Hinduism, one of the 7 holy cities, Sapta Puri. Here, say the ancients, Lord Krishna himself once lived. But we are not interested in the Dvarka that stands on the shore today, welcoming dawns and seeing off sunsets. We are interested in what lies beneath the water, what the waves hide, because the locals, fishermen, and pearl divers always knew that there was something under the surface of the sea. Their nets clung to underwater rocks laid out too correctly to be a creation of nature. Sometimes, on particularly clear days, when the water was as clear as glass, you could see the outline of something huge lying on the bottom. And people whispered, "That's it. Ancient Dwarka, the city that went underwater." The very name of the city sounds like music. Dwaraka. In Sanskrit, it means gate or portal, a door. Imagine how, centuries ago, foreign seafarers, tired from their long journey across the vast waters of the ocean, saw the outline of land on the horizon. Their ships, driven by the monsoon winds, were approaching the shore, and the first thing they saw was this city, Dwarka, the portal to India, the door to a world of spices, silks, gold, and ancient wisdom. Ancient authors have mentioned this place. The Peripple of the Erythraean Sea, that marvelous guidebook of ancient mariners of the 1st century AD, mentions the city as Baraka. Ptolemy, the great geographer of antiquity, referred to it as the island of Barake. Even in ancient times, Dwarka was known far beyond India. But for the Indians, Dwarka was much more than a port city. It was a sacred place, steeped in legends and tales so ancient that their origins are lost in the depths of millennia. These stories are recorded in ancient texts, in the great epic poem Mahabharata, in the Puranas, those encyclopedias of Indian mythology and philosophy, and they all tell the same amazing story. A long time ago, when the gods were still walking the earth among men, there was a city called Mathura. A king of the Yadav family ruled there, and there, in the king's prison, a boy was born who was destined to change the world. His name was Krishna. Legends tell us that this was not just a child, but an incarnation of Vishnu himself, the guardian of the universe, who descended to earth in dark times to restore the balance between good and evil. The story of his childhood is full of wonders. How he danced with cowherd girls, played the flute, tamed serpents, and defeated demons. But when Krishna grew up, when he overthrew his evil uncle and became ruler, he made a decision that changed the destiny of an entire nation. He decided to found a new city, a city that would become the capital of his kingdom. But not just anywhere, but at the very edge of the earth, where the land meets the ocean. Why there? Legends vary. Some say that the old capital, Mathura, was constantly being raided by enemies, and a more defensible location had to be found. Others say that the ocean itself offered Krishna the land for the new city. 12 yojanas of land reclaimed from the sea. A yojana is an ancient Indian measure of length, about 8 to 9 kilometers. Imagine 90-odd kilometers of land rising from the sea for the sacred city to stand on. And there, on this new land, under the guidance of Vishwakarma himself, the divine architect, the one who created the palaces of the gods, they began to build Dwarka. Legend has it that the construction took only 1 day. 1 day, and a city the likes of which the world had never seen grew. The Golden City, as they called it. A city of beautiful gardens, where fountains gurgled in the shade of sprawling trees, where flowers of every conceivable shade bloomed, filling the air with the scent of jasmine, rose, and lotus. A city of artificial ponds where white swans swam, and the water was so clear that it reflected the sky. A city of defense, with deep moats filled with water, with strong walls and towers, and palaces. About 900 palaces stood in Dwarka, each one a work of art, decorated with gold, precious stones, wood, and stone carvings. Try to imagine this city at dawn. The first rays of the sun touch the gilded domes of the palaces, and they burst with dazzling light, as if the earth itself had decided to compete with the sky. In the gardens, the birds wake up, their singing merging with the gurgling of water in the fountains. The first passers-by begin to move along the wide streets paved with white stone. Servants, merchants preparing to open their shops, priests heading to the temples for morning prayers. In the harbor, you can already hear the voices of sailors checking their ships before going to sea. The smell of salt, spices, freshly baked bread. It smells of life, prosperity, happiness. It was in this city that Krishna is said to have ruled over his people. Here he received visitors from all over the world. Here he consulted sages. Here he loved and was loved. Dwarka was not just the capital of the kingdom. It was the embodiment of the ideal city, a place where the earthly was united with the divine, where every stone was imbued with sacredness. After all, God himself lived here. But nothing in this world lasts forever. Not even the Golden City. Not even God's presence on earth. The legends tell what happened next with a special sadness, with that deep melancholy which pervades many Indian legends of the end of great epics. The time had come for Krishna to leave the earth. His mission was complete. The great war described in the Mahabharata, that war in which vast armies converged, in which the fate of the world was decided, was over. Krishna was no longer needed in this world in his earthly form. And he left. The date of his departure, his death, if we can call it the return of the god to his divine form, is considered sacred in Hinduism. the 18th of February, in the year 3102 BC. This date, according to the Mahabharata, marked the beginning of Kali Yuga, the age of darkness and decay, in which, as Hindus believe, we are still living today. And as soon as Krishna left, Dwarka began to die. Legends speak differently about what exactly happened. Some say it was a divine curse. The city could not exist without its creator and protector. Others say that the ocean itself, the same ocean that had once given the land for the city, now decided to take its gift back. The sea rose, the waves came, and the golden city went underwater. Imagine this picture. The last inhabitants of Dwarka stand on the shore, watching the water rise slowly, inexorably, flooding the streets they have walked all their lives, flooding houses, temples, palaces. The golden domes disappear underwater one by one. Gardens turn into underwater groves. Fountains mingle with the sea. And then the last tower, the last spire, disappears beneath the waves. And there is no more Dwarka. Only memory remains. Only the stories told around the evening fires remain. All that remains is the belief that once there was a city more beautiful than any the world has ever seen. Centuries passed, millennia passed. New settlements sprang up where Krishna's Dwarka once stood. People came, lived, left. The city was rebuilt, destroyed, built again. Local legends said that Dwarka went underwater 6 times, and each time a new city arose in its place. The 7th, modern city, the one that now stands on the shore, is the last in this long series of rebirths and disappearances. But the memory of the first, original Dwarka, the golden city of Krishna, never died. It lived on in the sacred texts, in the prayers of pilgrims, in the whisper of the waves. And there were always those who believed that it was not just a legend, that somewhere out there, under the sea, lay the remains of an ancient city. That it was possible to find evidence that Dwarka existed not only in myths, but also in reality. The 19th century brought European science, archaeology, and the methodical study of the past to India. Although European scholars often viewed Indian legends with some skepticism, Indian scholars viewed them differently. They knew that ancient texts often concealed real history, albeit embellished with poetic imagery and religious symbols. So they began to look for it. The first attempts to find the sunken Dwarka began in the 30s of the 20th century. They were still timid, tentative steps. Underwater archaeology at that time was in its infancy. There was no modern equipment, no experience, not even an understanding of how exactly to search for traces of ancient civilizations underwater. But the attempts continued, and in 1,963 years, there was an event that changed everything. Real archaeological excavations began. Imagine this time. India has recently gained independence. The country is full of enthusiasm, the desire to study and understand its past, to prove to the whole world the antiquity and greatness of its civilization. And so a group of archaeologists come to Dwarka. They start from the land, from the coastal zone, and almost immediately they find something interesting. In 1979, the Archaeological Survey of India discovers ceramics. Not just broken pottery, but pottery that can be dated. And the dating is astonishing. The 2nd millennium BC, over 3,000 years ago. This was older than many known Indian civilizations. It was almost as old as the legendary Indus Valley civilization, the Harappan culture. The discoveries continued. Between 1983 and 1999, archaeologists, like assembling a giant jigsaw puzzle, began to uncover more and more fragments of the past. Reinforced foundations emerged from beneath layers of soil and silt. Massive stone blocks worked by the hands of ancient craftsmen. Pillars that may have once supported the roofs of temples or palaces. Even the remains of irrigation systems, evidence of an advanced civilization that knew how to control water, how to tame it for its own needs. And in the year 1982, a discovery took place which excited the whole archaeological world. Dr. S.R. Rao, one of the pioneers of underwater archaeology in India, a man who had devoted his life to the search for sunken civilizations, discovered the remains of an ancient city at an incredible depth of 40 meters in the Gulf of Cambay. 40 meters underwater. Imagine the pressure there, in that dark depth, where sunlight hardly reaches. And there, in the cold silence of the seabed, lay stones that had been laid down by human hands millennia ago. But the most important, most methodical research began later, in the late 90s. This was no longer just an archaeological expedition, no longer just a group of enthusiasts with shovels and brushes. It was a scientific operation run by India's National Institute of Oceanography, an organization that knew the sea in a way that few others do. That institute's Center for Maritime Archaeology, from 1997 to 2001, conducted a series of underwater surveys off the coast of Dwarka. And what they discovered deserves to be told in detail, without hurry, so that you can imagine every detail of this marvelous underwater world. Their methodology was simple, yet complex. The primary tool was the human eye, underwater visual inspection. Divers, clad in scuba gear, plunged into the waters of the Arabian Sea day after day, slowly, methodically surveying the seabed. Imagine this. You go underwater, and at first, everything seems chaotic. Sand, seaweed, fish scurrying back and forth, the play of light and shadow. But gradually, your eye begins to recognize patterns. A rock lying a little too right, a line a little too straight to be natural. And then you see the outline of something bigger, a structure created not by nature, but by human hands. When they found something interesting, something buried under layers of sediment, they used an airlift, an ingenious device that works like a giant underwater hoover, gently, carefully blowing away sand and silt, revealing what had been lying hidden for centuries. Each find was recorded using GPS, noting the exact coordinates. The underwater survey covered an area of about 1 square kilometer. 1 square kilometer of seabed, centimeter by centimeter explored, documented, understood. And what did they find out there? In those waters, where the waves have been crashing against the shore of Dodwarka for several thousand years now, structures. A multitude of stone structures scattered across the seabed at depths ranging from the tidal zone to 6 meters. They lay there randomly, as if scattered by a giant hand, as if the city had really collapsed overnight, and its pieces had fallen wherever they had to. Some structures were semicircular, others rectangular or square. They varied in size, but they all had one thing in common. They had been created by human hands. They were not natural formations, not random piles of stones. They were something built, designed, created for a purpose. A particularly interesting concentration of worked stone blocks and structures was located opposite the mouth of the Gomati Creek. This small stream, Gomati Creek, flows from the southern side of modern Dvarka, flowing into the sea. Imagine how thousands of years ago it flowed in exactly the same way, perhaps being part of the town layout, a source of fresh water for the inhabitants. And now, in the sea opposite its mouth, lies the most traces of the ancient past. 4 round stone structures were found in the intertidal zone, where the water comes and goes, exposing the bottom twice a day, each about 2 meters in diameter. They could be seen at low tide as the sea receded, leaving them exposed. Imagine this moment. Early morning, the sun just rising above the horizon, coloring the sky in shades of pink and gold. And then the sea slowly recedes, like a curtain opening on a stage. And there, on the wet sand, are these ancient stone circles, covered in algae, covered in barnacles, but still distinguishable, still retaining the shape that the builders gave them centuries ago. But the most significant finds were deeper, in an area that the researchers called Site A, opposite the mouth of the Gomati, at a depth of 3 to 5 meters. They found something really impressive: semicircular structures made up of L-shaped blocks. These blocks were stacked on top of each other, forming something like walls. 2 or 3 rows of these blocks have survived, 60 to 80 centimeters high. They stood there on the seabed like silent guards, like the last defenders of a city that had long since disappeared. What is particularly striking is that some of these blocks used cementitious material, lime mortar. This meant that builders weren't just laying stones on top of each other, relying on their weight and gravity. They were cementing them together, creating strong, durable structures. They were thinking of the future. They wanted their creations to last for centuries. And, in a sense, they succeeded. These walls still stand today, albeit underwater, albeit ravaged by time and waves. The average size of one block was impressive: 95 centimeters long, 55 wide, 25 thick. Try to imagine the weight of such a stone. Try to imagine the effort required to cut it out of the rock, work it into the right shape, bring it to the construction site, lift it, and put it in place. And there were hundreds, maybe thousands, of such blocks. It was not the work of one person, not of one family. It was the work of an entire civilization, of a society capable of organizing and carrying out large-scale construction. In addition to the L-shaped blocks that made up the semicircular structures, they found a large number of rectangular blocks. Some of them were even larger, 120 centimeters long, 60 wide, 16 thick. They lay scattered across the bottom, like parts of some gigantic constructor, waiting for someone to put them back together. When the first photos of these underwater structures were published, when the world saw these semicircular walls standing on the sea floor, the excitement was immense. Could this be it? Could this really be the remains of the very legendary Dwarka, the city of Krishna? Some researchers, including Dr. S.R. Rao, were sure. Yes, this is it. They identified these structures as bastions, fortifications of the ancient city, the very walls that protected the Golden City from enemies and from the sea. And if these were indeed the bastions of Dwarka Krishna, it would mean that the legend was true, that the sacred texts described real events, that thousands of years ago, a great city really stood here and then went underwater. But science requires caution. Science requires evidence. And here a problem arose that caused later researchers to think and revise the original conclusions. You see, when archaeologists dig up an ancient settlement on land, they expect to find more than just walls and foundations. They expect to find traces of life, pottery, shards of broken pots and cups, coins, seals, jewelry, tools, pet bones, food scraps, all the things that inevitably accumulate wherever humans live. We humans leave rubbish behind us. We lose things, break crockery, throw away things we no longer need. And all this settles in the ground, becoming over time archaeological layers that can be read like the pages of a book. But here at Dwarka, despite extensive work with the airlift, despite the fact that the researchers carefully examined every square meter of the seabed around the underwater structures, they found nothing of the sort. No pottery shards, no coins, no seals, no everyday objects, nothing that would have been necessary for a habitable settlement. It was strange. It was a mystery. If this was really the remains of a city, a residential city, where thousands of people lived, where life boiled, where food was cooked, children were raised, trade was conducted, prayers were said. Where were all the traces of that life? And then researchers from the National Institute of Oceanography proposed another interpretation. They suggested that perhaps these structures were not part of the city itself, not bastions of a residential settlement. Maybe they were the remains of a wharf. A wharf. Port facilities. Think about it logically. Dwarka, according to all sources, both legendary and historical, was a port city. It stood on the shores of the ocean. It was the gateway to India for foreign seafarers. So it must have had a port. There must have been wharves where ships moored. There had to be wharves where goods were unloaded. And such facilities didn't need living quarters. You didn't live there. You worked there. There were no household utensils. There were ropes, anchors, mooring hooks, and indeed, when researchers began to look at the finds from this angle, many things fell into place. The L-shaped blocks of semicircular structures could have been wharf pillars, the base for wooden decks where cargo handlers and sailors walked. The rectangular blocks could have been part of the superstructure, a platform rising above the water. And the very fact that a large number of anchors were found near these structures. Oh, there were a lot of anchors there, but we will talk about that a little later. This fact became an additional confirmation. There was a port here, but there is another detail that makes one wonder. Round or semicircular bastions, if indeed they were bastions, were a type of fortification that came into use quite late in India. Historical records and archaeological data show that round defensive towers began to be built in India only in the 11th to 12th centuries AD. Before that, rectangular or square towers and walls were preferred. And if the structures of Dwarka are indeed semicircular in shape as an element of fortification, it would mean that they cannot be as ancient as originally assumed. They cannot date back to the time of Krishna, which, according to legend, is the late 4th to early 3rd millennium BCE. Another interesting detail is related to construction materials and techniques. When the researchers compared the construction methods used in Dwarka's underwater structures with those used in the proto-historic settlements of the region. For example, in Bet Dwarka, an island near the coast where excavations have also taken place, they found significant differences. In the proto-historic Beth Dwarka, which actually dates back to the 2nd millennium BC, the stones were worked rather roughly. They were large, massive blocks, but their surface was uneven. Their edges were not perfectly straight, and they were bonded not with lime mortar, but with clay, a simpler, older material. This was early architecture, the architecture of the era when stone construction technologies were just developing. And in Dwarka, in the underwater structures, the stones were worked much finer, neater. The surfaces were flat. The angles were straight. The dimensions were standardized. And lime mortar was used, a more advanced technique requiring knowledge of how to fire limestone, how to mix it with other ingredients to create a strong cement. It was the work of craftsmen with experience, with tradition, with advanced technology. These differences suggested that most likely the underwater structures of Dwarka and the proto-historic settlements of the region were not contemporaries. Centuries, perhaps millennia, of construction techniques lay between them, and one more find made researchers think about a later dating. A rectangular stone block with an inscription was found in the coastal zone, not far from underwater structures. The inscription was in Gujarati, the language of Gujarat, the state of Gujarat, where Dwarka is located. And the script used in this inscription belonged to the late Middle Ages. It was not an ancient script, nor was it a writing of the proto-historic period. It was a relatively modern form of writing for India that had developed only in the last 1,000 years or so. All this, the absence of domestic artifacts, the late type of fortifications, advanced construction technologies, inscriptions in medieval Gujarati. All this has led researchers from the National Institute of Oceanography to suggest that the date of Dwarka's underwater structures may be much later than originally thought. Not the 3rd millennium BC, not the time of Krishna and the Mahabharata, but rather somewhere between the historical period and the late Middle Ages. That is, perhaps from the 1st centuries AD to the 15th or 16th century. But you know what the most amazing thing about this story is? What really takes your breath away and makes you think about the magnitude of what happened here in the past? It's not so much the stone structures. It's not so much the semicircular walls or the rectangular blocks. It's the anchors. Hundreds of stone anchors lying on the seabed off the coast of Dwarka. Over 120 stone anchors. Imagine that number, 120. They lie there, up to 16 meters deep, scattered across the seabed, like silent witnesses to thousands and thousands of voyages. Each anchor is a ship. Each anchor is a sailor, a merchant, a cargo of goods from faraway lands. Every anchor is a story of someone who sailed here, threw that heavy stone overboard to hold their ship in place, and may never have picked it back up. Maybe the anchor broke during a storm. Maybe it was deliberately left behind, replaced with a new one. Maybe the ship sank, and the anchor was left at the bottom with it, along with the hopes and dreams of those on board. Stone anchors are a special category of archaeological finds. You see, in ancient times, long before people learnt to cast metal in such quantities to make anchors from it, they used stone. They took a suitable stone, worked it into the right shape, made holes for the ropes, and there you had an anchor. Simple, heavy, reliable. Of course, the stone anchor had its disadvantages. It was fragile. It could not be used on a very rocky bottom, where it could split. But for sandy bottoms, for not too deep water, for calm harbors, it was perfect. And Dwarka's anchors are amazing in their diversity. This is not just one type of anchor, not a standard model used by everyone. No, there are anchors of different shapes, different sizes, made of different materials. This shows that ships came here from different places, that different maritime traditions met here, that Dvarka was a crossroads of sea routes. Most anchors are made of limestone. It is a soft stone that is relatively easy to work. You can cut it into the shape you want, drill holes in it, and it's still heavy enough to hold a ship. But there are anchors made of other materials. Basalt, this dark volcanic stone that is much harder and stronger than limestone. There are anchors made of sandstone and laterite, a reddish stone that forms in tropical regions. The researchers have categorized Dwarka's anchors into 3 main groups, 3 types, each telling its own story. The first type is composite anchors. Imagine an irregularly shaped stone, but with a certain structure. At the top is a round hole. This is for the rope that went to the ship. At the bottom, 2 rectangular or square holes. That's for the pause. You see, the stone itself is just the body of the anchor, its main weight. But for the anchor to really hold, for it to cling to the bottom and not just lie on it, it had to be attached to it with paws, sharp protrusions that stick into the sand or mud. And for these legs, holes were made in the stone. Researchers speculate that the paws may have been wooden. Wood combined with stone makes sense. Wood is available. It is easy to work. And you can cut the paws to the desired shape. And if a paw breaks or wears off, it can be replaced without changing the stone anchor itself. However, wooden legs, if there were any, have long disappeared, rotted in the seawater. Metal legs were not found either, although theoretically they could have existed. So we can only speculate as to exactly what these composite anchors looked like when fully assembled. But the idea is elegant in its simplicity. Stone gives weight, wood or metal gives grip. The second type of anchors is more exotic, more unusual for the Indian coast. These are long, heavy anchors, which researchers call grab type or Arabian anchors. Their shape is different from the composite ones. They are elongated stones, sometimes with several protrusions or horns. The name itself speaks of their origin. They are believed to have been brought here by Arab traders. Imagine the Arabian trading dhow, those beautiful ships with triangular sails that 1,000 years ago plied the waters of the Indian Ocean, linking the Arabian Peninsula with India, with Africa, with the islands of Southeast Asia. On their decks are incense from Yemen, dates from Oman, pearls from Bahrain. And in the holds, among the cargo, lie these heavy stone anchors, ready to be thrown overboard at any moment. Arabian anchors were designed for universal use. They had to hold securely on any type of bottom, on sand, rocks, and coral. Because Arab merchants didn't always know which harbor the wind would take them into, and what kind of bottom was waiting for them, they needed reliability, versatility. And these grab anchors gave them just that. Specimens of such anchors up to 2 meters and 30 centimeters long have been found in Dwarka. 2 meters and 30 centimeters of stone anchor. Try to imagine the weight of such a monster. Researchers believe that these may be some of the heaviest stone anchors ever found. To hoist such an anchor aboard required a team of strong men, probably some mechanical devices, blocks, winches. These were not anchors for small fishing boats, but for large merchant ships carrying tons of cargo across the open sea. And the fact that such anchors are found here in Dvarka speaks volumes about the scale of trade that took place in this port. It was not just local boats that came here. Great ships from distant lands came here, laden with goods, with gold, with dreams of profit. The third type of anchor is perhaps the most elegant. They are called ring anchors, or Saurashtra anchors, after the name of the region where they supposedly originated. Imagine a round or hemispherical stone with a hole drilled through the center. A simple, almost minimalist shape, like a large stone bagel or donut, if you want a more modern comparison. These anchors were used by local boats, fishing vessels, and small coastal trading ships that traveled along the coast, from port to port, carrying local goods, fish, salt, cloth, pottery. The ring anchor was simple to make, relatively light, though heavy enough to hold a boat, and reliable. It has been shown that such anchors did work effectively, that they were not just decorative stones, but real functional tools of maritime trade. The name Saurashtra anchor indicates that this design may have been invented or perfected here on this coast and spread further from here. This is an interesting thought, that it was here, off the coast of Gujarat, that a certain maritime technology was born, which was then used all along the west coast of India. But let's get away from the technical details for a moment and try to imagine the big picture. Here before us is the seabed at Dvarka. The depth is 10 meters. The water is transparent in good weather and murky after a storm. The bottom is sandy, in some places stony. Algae ripples in the underwater current. Fish scurry back and forth, busy with their fishy business. And in the midst of it all, like islands in the underwater world, lie anchors. 120 anchors. Each one is a moment in history. This composite anchor with wooden legs, it may have been thrown overboard by a local fisherman 2,000 years ago. He came here in his boat, cast his nets, waited for his catch. The anchor held the boat in place, preventing the wind and current from carrying it out to the open sea. And then something happened. Maybe there was a storm. Maybe the rope got frayed on the rocks on the bottom. And the anchor stayed. It stayed at the bottom until it was discovered by archaeologists thousands of years later. And this long grappling anchor, it was brought by an Arab merchant, maybe in the 10th century. He came from Oman, and his ship was full of goods, dates, frankincense, silver cups. He anchored off Dwarka's quay, unloaded his goods, loaded Indian spices, cloth, ivory, and sailed back. But the anchor, for some reason, stayed. Maybe he bought a new, more modern one. Maybe he just forgot it in the hustle and bustle of trading and sailing. And this ring anchor, it was used by a small coaster boat that traveled between the ports of Saurashtra, carrying salt from the salt marshes to the cities, and from there bringing back grain and oil. A simple anchor for a simple boat, for simple people making a living from the sea. 120 such stories, 120 moments frozen in time, and all of them together tell one big story. The story that Dwarka wasn't just a city. It was a port, one of the busiest, most active ports on the west coast of India. Think about what it means to have over 120 anchors. These are not anchors lost in a year or a decade. This is the accumulation of centuries, maybe millennia of maritime activity. It means that ships came here all the time, day after day, year after year, century after century. Some have come and gone, leaving the anchor behind. Some lost an anchor in a storm. Somebody traded an old anchor for a new one. And all these anchors settled to the bottom, accumulated, creating this amazing collection of stone evidence of maritime trade. Imagine this harbor in its heyday. Early morning. The sun is just rising above the horizon, coloring the sea in shades of pink and gold. And then the first sail appears on the horizon. Then the second. Then the third. The ships approach the shore, one by one. Arabian dhows with their distinctive triangular sails. Indian merchant ships, more squat, heavier. Maybe even ships from further afield, from East Africa, from the Persian Gulf, from Southeast Asia. They drop anchors. Heavy blocks of stone fall overboard with a thud, sinking to the bottom, raising clouds of sand. The ropes tighten, and the ships stop, rocking on the waves. And the work begins. A crowd gathers on the quay. Cargo handlers, customs officers, traders, the curious. The sailors come ashore, weathered, tired after a long journey, but satisfied that they have reached their destination. Unloading begins. Bales and sacks, crates and barrels are transferred from ship to shore. Smells mingle in the air, salt of the sea, sweat of the workers, spices from the holds, frankincense, musk, sandalwood. You can hear the shouting of the loaders, the counting of goods, arguments about price, laughter, swearing in 10 different languages. Then the loading begins. Indian goods are loaded onto the ships, which will soon be on their way back. Fabrics, fine cotton, gold-embroidered silk, spices, pepper, cardamom, ginger, turmeric, ivory, precious stones. All those things for which people are ready to sail across the seas, to risk their lives in storms and in front of pirates. And in the evening, when work is done, when goods are unloaded and loaded, when money has changed hands and accounts have been settled, captains and merchants gather in the coastal taverns. They drink palm wine or arak, eat fish fried with local spices, and tell stories. Stories of distant lands, of storms, of wonders seen on voyages. And these stories are passed on from sailor to sailor, from merchant to merchant, spreading along the trade routes, linking the whole known world with a web of stories and rumors. This is what Dwarka was like, a crossroads of worlds, a place where cultures met, where they exchanged not only goods, but also ideas, technologies, beliefs, a place that lived by the sea, breathed the sea, existed because of the sea. And the dating of these anchors, by the way, gives us an important clue as to when this particular harbor was most active. You see, stone anchors are a difficult object to date. Stone is stone. It doesn't contain organic material that can be radiocarbon dated. The only way to date a stone anchor is to compare its shape and type to other known anchors found in contexts that can be dated. And what is interesting is that the anchors of Dwarka are different in shape from those found in the Harappan ports of Lothal and Kuntasi. The Harappan civilization, one of the oldest in the world, flourished in the Indus Valley from about 3,300 to 1,300 BC. Its ports used their own types of anchors, different from those we see in Dwarka. This means that the anchors of Dwarka are most likely not contemporary with the Harappan civilization. They came later. Grapple, anchors, Arabian anchors, and Saurashtra ring anchors, both of which, according to archaeological evidence, are associated with the Indo-Arabic trade. And this trade took place sometime between the 8th and 15th centuries AD. This is the period when Arab merchants dominated the Indian Ocean, when regular trade routes were established between the Arabian Peninsula and India, when whole dynasties of merchant families emerged and became rich from this trade. There is another interesting confirmation that these anchors were used during this period, between the 8th and 15th centuries. Archaeologists have found grab anchors reused in later structures. In the Vijayadurg and Sindhudurg forts, two powerful forts on the Maharashtra coast built during the Maratha Empire, these ancient stone anchors were embedded in the walls as lintels, architectural elements. Imagine this: an old anchor that had served its purpose at sea found a new life in a fort wall, becoming part of land defense instead of sea defense. This means that by the time these forts were built, and the Maratha Empire reached its height in the 17th to 18th centuries. The grab anchors were already old, obsolete, out of use. They could be used as building material because they were no longer needed for their intended purpose. Maritime technology had changed. More efficient anchors had appeared. Perhaps already metal anchors. And the old stone giants found their final resting place in the fortress walls, continuing to serve people, but in a completely different capacity. All this together, the shape of the anchors, their connection with Indo-Arab trade, the archaeological context of their reuse, all this points to the fact that the peak of activity in the port of Dwarka, the period when the port was bustling with life, when dozens of ships anchored in these waters, was in the Middle Ages, a period when the Indian Ocean was the scene of great trading activity, when Arab merchants linked east and west, north and south, when spices from India were worth their weight in gold in distant Europe, when camel caravans met ship caravans, and the wealth of the world flowed by sea and land. But does this mean that the legend of ancient Dwarka, of Krishna's golden city, is just a myth, a beautiful fairy tale that has nothing to do with reality? Don't jump to conclusions. The history of this place is much more complex and interesting than it may seem at first glance. You see, archaeological research shows that the Aukamandal area, the region in which Dwarka is located, has a very long, very rich cultural sequence. People have lived here for more than 1 millennium. Settlements emerged, flourished, declined, disappeared, and in their place, new ones emerged. And this sequence begins with the proto-historic period, from about 2,000 years BC, that is, 4,000 years ago, and continues uninterruptedly until the modern period. There is an island not far from modern Dvarka, Bet Dvarka. Extensive excavations have been carried out on this island and have revealed the presence of a settlement dating back to the 2nd millennium BC. There is also the Nageshwar settlement and other sites in the region where traces of ancient cultures have been found. All these places together create a picture of a region that has been inhabited and active since the very beginning of civilization in India. Why here? What has drawn people to this place for thousands of years? The answer, in essence, is simple. Geography. It is the extreme westernmost point of the Saurashtra Peninsula. From here is the open sea. From here is the nearest route across the Arabian Sea to the Arabian Peninsula, to the Persian Gulf, to Africa. For navigators coming from the west towards India, this is the natural point of arrival. For seafarers going from India to the west, it is the natural point of departure. And just as importantly, it has fresh water. The Gomati Creek, which flows today as it did thousands of years ago. And for any port, for any settlement, water is life. So, from the very beginning, ever since people learnt to build ships and take to the open sea, this place has attracted seafarers and traders. They stopped here to replenish their water supplies. They anchored here to wait out storms. Here they exchanged goods with the locals. Over time, permanent settlements, harbors, and towns sprang up here, and perhaps, among these cities, there was one which has remained in popular memory, in legends, in sacred texts, as Krishna's Dwarka. Perhaps it was not built in one day by a divine architect. It may not have had 900 golden palaces, but perhaps there was indeed a significant city here in deep antiquity, a city that for some reason, sea level rise, tsunami, earthquake, went underwater. And the memory of it, passed down from generation to generation, grew in detail, embellished with poetic images, until it became the beautiful legend we know today. That's often the case with legends, isn't it? They are based on a real event, a real place, real people. But time, passing through them like light through a prism, refracts reality, colors it in the bright colors of myth, adds gods and heroes, miracles and magic. And the result is a story that is true on a deeper, more important level than mere historical facts. A story that tells not just what happened, but what it meant to people, how they felt about it, what they believed. Maybe in proto-historic times, 4,000 years ago, there really had been a city here. Maybe it was not the biggest city, not the most magnificent, but for the people of that time, it was the center of their world, the embodiment of civilization and order. And then came the catastrophe. Geological studies show that the sea level in this region did rise at various times in history, and tsunamis in the Indian Ocean are not that rare. And the city went underwater. But the memory of it remained. And this memory, transmitted over millennia, was eventually recorded in sacred texts, in the Mahabharata and the Puranas, but in the form of a myth in which the historical city became a divine creation, and its demise became part of a cosmic drama. And then, centuries later, maybe even millennia later, people returned to this place because the place was still good. Access to the sea, fresh water, a convenient harbor, and they built a new city, a new harbor. And this new city also prospered, also traded with the whole world, also was full of life. And it is the remains of this medieval harbor these medieval moorings and anchors that we find today on the seabed. So perhaps both those who believe in the legend of ancient Dvarka and those who date the underwater finds to the Middle Ages are right. They are simply talking about different layers of the history of this amazing place. Different cities that stood here in different eras. Dvarka was not one city. It was a succession of cities, each of which was built on the site of the previous one or next to it, inheriting its name, its sanctity, its connection with the sea. Local legend says that Dvarka went underwater 6 times. The modern city is the 7th. Maybe it's not just a beautiful metaphor. Maybe it is an echo of the real history of a place that has indeed experienced catastrophes and revivals, cycles of destruction and restoration many times. And you know what's really great about that? That we still don't know the whole truth. That the mystery remains unsolved. Researchers at the National Institute of Oceanography honestly admit that further excavations, more systematic, more scientific, are needed to come to definitive conclusions. That the debate over the dating of the structures continues. That each new find could change our picture of the past. There is something deeply satisfying in knowing that not all mysteries have been solved, that not all riddles have been solved. In our world, where it seems that every corner of the earth has been explored, every mountain conquered, every depth explored, it is comforting to know that there are still places that hold their secrets, that beneath the waves of the Arabian Sea, off the coast of Dwarka, lies so much more that we do not know, do not understand, cannot explain. Maybe someday, in the future, new expeditions will find something that will change the whole picture. Maybe they will discover artifacts that unambiguously date the structures to the proto-historic period, confirming the boldest interpretations of the legend. Or maybe, on the contrary, they'll find evidence that the whole thing is much later than anyone thought. Or maybe, and this is perhaps the most interesting possibility, they will discover layers of different eras, one under the other, like pages in a book, and will be able to read the whole long history of this place from the very beginning to the present day. But for now, underwater Dvarka remains a place where myth and reality, faith and science, past and present meet. A place that makes us think about the nature of history, how we remember the past, how we talk about it, how we try to understand it. And maybe that's the real value of such places. Not in giving us the exact answers, but in asking the right questions. How are legends born? How much truth is there in myths? What does a holy place mean to people? And why do they return to it again and again, century after century, millennium after millennium. Pilgrims continue to come to modern Dwarka. They come to the temples, immerse themselves in the sacred waters, and pray to Krishna. It does not matter to them what archaeologists say about the dating of the underwater structures. For them, Dwarka is sacred, not because there are stones of a certain age lying there, but because this place is connected with their faith, with their tradition, with 1,000 years of unbroken line of worship and devotion. And there is a profound wisdom in that, because the sanctity of a place is not measured by radiocarbon analysis. It is measured by people's love for it, by their faith in it, by the memory of generations who came here to seek a connection with the divine, with the eternal, with something greater than themselves. And beneath the water, in the cold silence of the seabed, lie the stones, semicircular walls of L-shaped blocks, rectangular masses of stone, 120 anchors of various shapes and sizes. They lie there, covered in algae, covered in barnacles, sheltering fish and crabs. The sea has taken them in, made them part of its underwater world. The waves crash against the shore, the tides change, storms come and go. But the stones remain, silent witnesses of the past, which was once bright, alive, full of sounds and smells, laughter and tears, trade and prayers, and which now sleeps a deep sleep at the bottom of the sea. But every wave lapping at Dvarka's shore, every tide, is like the breath of the sea, eternal, unchanging. And in that breath, if you listen, if you stand still in the silence of the night, you can hear a whisper, the whispers of all those who once lived here, sailors and merchants, priests and kings, simple fishermen and great navigators, all those whose lives have been linked to this place, to this city, to these waters. They whisper their stories, stories of distant journeys and safe return home, of storms endured at sea and quiet harbors to rest in, of goods bought and sold, of profit and loss, of risks and rewards, about meeting people from faraway lands, speaking strange languages, believing in other jurs, about how the big world became a little smaller, a little clearer, with each such journey, with each such meeting. And amidst all these whispers, maybe, there is another voice, older, quieter, almost indistinguishable, the voice of that very first city, the one that stood here at the beginning of all beginnings, a city that was perhaps really golden, not literally, not because it was covered in gold, but because it was golden in people's memory, in their love for it, in their memories of happy times. The city that went underwater so long ago that the reality of its existence turned into a legend. But this legend was stronger than time, stronger than the waves of the ocean, stronger than all the catastrophes and destruction. It's still alive today. It attracts pilgrims and scientists, believers and skeptics. Everyone who is fascinated by the eternal mystery of sunken cities, and as long as the waves crash against the shore, as long as the tides turn, as long as people come to the sea and look at the horizon, dreaming of what lies beyond, the legend of Dvarka will live on. It will inspire. It will remind us that the world is full of wonders, that beneath the surface of the familiar lies the extraordinary, that history is not just dates and facts, but the living fabric of human experience, woven from hopes and fears, dreams and memories. So, my dear listeners, the next time you find yourself by the sea, the next time you stand on the shore and look at the waves, think of Dvarka. Remember that somewhere out there, beneath the water column, may lie the remains of ancient cities, evidence of forgotten civilizations. That the sea holds more secrets than we could ever solve in 1,000 lifetimes. And that it is wonderful to know that there are still mysteries waiting to be solved, stories waiting to be told. For now, I bid you farewell for today. May this story of a golden city under the sea, of stone anchors and semicircular walls on the seabed, of myths and reality, of a past that lives in the present, lull you to sleep and lead you into a world of peaceful, lucid dreams. Maybe you will dream of the sea. Maybe you will see in your dream an ancient city standing on the ocean, shining under the southern sun. Or maybe you will dive into the warm, transparent waters and see there, at the bottom, among algae and fish, the very stones that have been lying there for so many centuries, keeping their secrets. Good night, dear friends. May your dreams be as deep and peaceful as the silence of the sea. May your rest be as full as the full moon over the ocean. And may, when you wake up, the world seem a little more mysterious, a little more wonderful than it was yesterday, because it really is, full of wonder, full of stories, full of places like Dvarka, where the past whispers to us across the waves about times that no longer exist, but are forever remembered in the stones, the sea, and the hearts of men. See you next time. Sleep well.